Well, good afternoon. I hope everyone is rested and full. My name is Peter Hoch. I am from the Missouri Botanical Garden in St. Louis. And I'd first like to extend my thanks to Linda and the organizers of this very stimulating meeting. And thank you for inviting me to participate. It's been a great honor and pleasure for me to serve on the Lewis and Clark selection committee for a decade or so, and to be able to read so many exciting and innovative proposals from these bright young minds that we're able to get. It's also been a source of great angst for me because inevitably we can't fund them all, and there are ones that I think, oh, I wish we could fund it, but alas, not possible. As for my own career, when I was an undergraduate, another pre-med, and that was many years before Lewis and Clark program got started. By serendipity, I was offered a research position, a summer research position, supported by NSF. The program was called Undergraduate Research Program. For some reason, they very soon changed that from ERP to RU. I don't know why. But with that support, I was able to spend that and a subsequent summer running around in the mountains in Colorado, chasing butterflies and looking at the plants that they visited and that they didn't visit. You know, what's not to like here? So I was hooked on doing field research. Medicine went by the wayside, and I ended up taking my PhD in plant biology. And throughout my career, I've always gravitated to opportunities to interact with and to facilitate the research of graduate students and undergraduate students, because it was clear to me early on that these bright young minds that are coming up are often the ones that bring new ideas in and new approaches. And, you know, you talk to them and they say, where'd you come up with that? So it's been a great trip. Now, the theme of this session is innovation, and these past 2 decades of the time of the Lewis and Clark program have brought pretty incredible changes. I mean, we take some things for granted. On the technological side, an obvious example of innovation and growth, but one that we do, I think, sometimes take for granted, is the incredible development of computer and digital work and tools. It's for example, I mean, it has brought about the development of GIS systems, GIS, okay, which has been really a revolutionary thing for a lot of field ecology, anthropology, and many other fields, marine biology, and in addition to the big digital advance, brought about new analytical tools so that we were able to take much bigger data sets and figure out what to do with them, and then figure out what they're telling us and be able to look at phylogenies and get a much more precise understanding of the evolutionary relationships of organisms. Another example of the growth that's happened in those 20 years has been in molecular biology and genomics. Obviously, that's an enormous one. I won't go into that very much because it actually, we get proposals in the Lewis and Clark program that certainly use molecular techniques, but that's not the primary focus of them. But again, it's another one of these things we sort of take for granted, but think about what things were like in 2005, 2000, not nearly as well developed. One of the examples, and it's only been mentioned once, I think, in the talk so far, has been that, and this comes in some of our more recent Lewis and Clark applications, and that is the term microbiome. Well, microbiome was hardly even known back in the 2000 or 2005, and yet these remarkable complex communities of microorganisms are now known and being studied in all plants and in animals. I mean, somebody had a proposal to look at the microbiome on the surface of a leaf. It's pretty breathtaking, and of course it's opened up a whole new way of thinking about how organisms operate, and of course originally from human health, but it's developed from there. So certainly there are other technological innovations, some of which occurring in the Lewis and Clark applications kind of give me a headache because I don't really understand them very well. I mean, ones in geology and marine biology sometimes really require a lot of work for me to figure out what they're talking about. But you know, they're certainly enormously important innovations. But of equal importance are the innovations in the approach that people are taking. And there have been a lot of talks here because we have a lot of people, especially in anthropology, who are you know, demonstrating the impact of how to approach your study system, the inclusion of indigenous culture and indigenous knowledge. We had some great talks in this last session, and we'll have more in the talks we're about to hear. I was struck by the graph in Alex Baxter's talk that showed the growth of the number of papers that incorporated indigenous knowledge. And starting about 2005, which is exactly when Lewis and Clark got started, it really took off. I mean, prior to that time, there were almost no papers that included that as a part of the whole approach to their research. So, and that certainly is we find a lot of that in the applications that we get. Outreach, yes, but specifically trying to include indigenous knowledge in the development of their programs. There are other kinds of technological and sociological, if you will, approaches that are new. Certainly, in terms of scanning, we had a mention of you know, the use of marine scanning, marine drones, and we'll hear today another talk that talks about the use of drones for scanning in anthropology and for things like LIDAR and thermal imaging. I mean, these are remarkable tools that are now being put to use in ways that 20 years ago we never imagined. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers for this session. First is Andrew Abdalian, who is a linguist working with the Tunica Language Working Group in Louisiana. He'll be talking about language revitalization of the Tunica language, including the development of digital tools for learning and analysis. Our next speaker would be Lise Dobrin, who is a professor of anthropology at the University of Virginia, who will discuss her long-term work in Papua New Guinea and in the face of modern communication, discuss whether or not immersion in this or other kinds of or other cultures is still possible as part of a research program. And our last speaker this afternoon will be Rosa Marie Varillas, who's a doctoral student in anthropology at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and a native of Peru, who will discuss her use of drones in architectural fieldwork, archaeological fieldwork in Peru, which has allowed rapid surveys of large areas and the identification of important archaeological sites. So with that, I would ask Andrew to come up and present the first talk, which is, title of which is Technology and Community Engaged Language Revitalization, Building Accessible Solutions in Awakening the Tunica Language.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the APS not only for having me here today, but also for the long-term fellowship that enabled my research this past year. I want to talk about the promise and peril of digital tools in endangered and reawakening languages and the projects. But I want to focus a bit at the outset on how traditional understandings of what fieldwork is and where it takes place don't fit into the work of reawakening language projects. So previous talks have discussed the history of fieldwork being extractive in nature, taking objects or knowledge from the field back to the laboratory or the academy for study or display. Linguistics has had a similar history of extractive practice, taking linguistic data and whatever cultural knowledge is contained within it. Language is just one facet of culture, and extracting it from the community separates it from its proper cultural context. Community-based research, which we've also talked about a lot the last couple of days, aims to halt this extractive process by ensuring that, in this case, a language community is both the source of and the beneficiary, a source of the data and the beneficiary of the analysis of that data. In language revitalization context, this means that the community dictates the information gathering process and co-creates scholarship, which is undertaken for community goals. But in language reawakening, the concept of the field is flipped on its head because the language is no longer spoken, because there are no native speakers and in many cases there are hardly any rememberers. The community can no longer be the primary source of linguistic information. This is not to say that the community doesn't have information to offer about their language and cultural practices, but traditional field methods like elicitation will not yield results. If we place the traditional frame of fieldwork onto language reawakening contexts, the field is where the language information resides, which ironically is in the academic institutions, archives, and museums. And the academy, the place of analysis, and in this case co-creation, is with the community itself. So I like to think of language reawakening projects and this sort of work as, and again, this is a word we've heard at least once in this past couple of days, as an act of repatriation. So here's my outline. I'm going to be straying from it a little bit just because I think I need to have different points of focus. But we're going to talk about digital technology and indigenous language revitalization. We're talking about the specific area of Tunica language revitalization and the digital products we've created. So why language revitalization? I mean, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but there are many pressures that encourage language endangerment and language loss. But communities continue to work to retain or reclaim their heritages. But if people need more than these communities want to speak their language, there are health and educational benefits of indigenous language use by indigenous communities. But there are obviously lots of difficulties, the breaks in intergenerational transmission, no written form, there may be no or little presence in certain environments or domains, specifically online. And in reawakening languages, no documented vocabulary for certain concepts. And so it may be seen as a language of the past or a language of the old and not fit for current times. And language has been decoupled from the rest of cultural life. So digital language technology is a source of both optimism and concern. It means that you're probably going to be able to create some really interesting and innovative and engaging ways of learning. It's going to be easier to extend the reach of that language in the digital domain. And it can increase the language's prestige, which is something that is worth thinking about because the how much the language projects get bought into often depends on how the language is viewed and whether it's viewed as worth learning. So here's a quote just about the importance of digital technology in terms of, this is mostly from the side of language workers, and how they can use digital technologies to record, preserve, analyze, manipulate, and transmit. But it's also a source of concern. There's significant investment and maintenance costs of varying quality and effectiveness. There's a high learning curve, and in a lot of cases you have to go through gatekeepers, and this results in the loss of control over a community over its language. So they document, archive, and teach, but they also contribute to privacy concerns, cultural appropriation, misuse of control, manipulation of cultural knowledge. So you have to be really aware of how much these digital projects depend on gatekeepers and corporations. So Tunica is a heritage language of the Tunica-Biloxi tribe, and it's a language isolate, which makes reawakening it very difficult. We can't depend on any other languages to fill in gaps and sort of determine what a word would have looked like or how a sentence would have been constructed. So we're depending entirely on 3 periods of documentation, and this is the triad was the most important. Thierry talked about the linguistic triad of texts, dictionary, and grammar. And we did get that in the 1930s as part of a project of trying to gather up data before these languages disappeared to be able to situate them in language families. So early revitalization efforts, people often think about linguists coming in and saving a language, linguists coming in and reintroducing a language. The community always wanted this. There were community efforts and attempts to revitalize this language. I want to focus on the long-term partnership between Tulane University, where I did my PhD, and the tribe itself that started in 2010. And Thierry also mentioned this very briefly, is that I see myself and we see ourselves on the academic side as interpreters of this sort of arcane, inscrutable knowledge that was written down in the 1930s. And what we try to do is take those and create out of them things that communities can use. So the Tunica grammar became the Tunica textbook, the Tunica texts became children's books, and the Tunica dictionary has been used in online dictionary and dictionary apps. And this is just some of the pictures of the children's books, the textbook, and the dictionary apps. But one of the things I'm going to skip through that, I'm running low on time. One of the things I want to talk about is the sort of difficulties in terms of the tools that we use. The products by SIL are probably some of the most used in language revitalization because they're free. But they're built for linguists, not for communities, and that's a very important thing to keep in mind and what we've tried to get away from. They've offered different ways to get things on the web, but they control the website. They control what we can, what sort of features we get added. And the dictionary apps are even harder because then you're also going through Apple and Google, and so you need to be very considerate. It does raise the prestige of the popularity of the Tunica language dictionary iPhone app was very enthusiastically received. But again, what we need to look at is, if you look on the right here, on the left, you can see that it was last updated. I did this a week ago or so. It was last updated in late September, but the app was last updated 4 months ago because of the difficulty in getting it uploaded. So we're looking for alternatives. Open source things are probably the best, things that rely on the internet only, things where you know the people who are making them. Living Dictionaries is a place where I know some of the people who work on it, and therefore I think it's still a gatekeeper of a sort, but one that's more aligned with the community's goals. And then how to display Tunica texts. You can use SIL and get it onto the web in a way that's very difficult to search. This is and it's also very daunting to do this sort of work, or to look at this and see the language depicted at all sorts of levels of detail for someone who is not a linguist. So we've looked at other solutions. We've looked at LingView, which allows for some customization. This is the full text, and then you can take out all these tiers and just look at the language and its translation. But one of the things we've also done is to reformat the original text. Now, why would we do this? It doesn't use modern orthography. It's not interlinear. It's not digital, but it improves the readability of the original work for both language workers and communities. One thing that I was sort of interested in was that the communities have a real thirst for interacting with the original documentation to get as close as they can to when the language was documented. And also PDFs are accessible, they're downloadable, they're readable and offline. And one of the things I really want to draw your attention to is it's not always the most advanced technologies that do the most to revitalize language. So this is the original way it was laid out in these large blocks of text, and we redid it so that each sentence is right next to each other, and you can really see the comparison. So just a couple of conclusions. Reawakening projects repatriate extracted linguistic information. Digital tools can facilitate, but must operate within constraints of these very limited projects in terms of resources. Speaking of underfunded mandates, there's a real desire to have these languages back, but it's hard to get funding. And lastly, the tools that our project uses has shown that they should be user-friendly, simple, customizable, cross-platform, and tailored to community need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Our next speaker is Lise Dobrin, and she is going to speak on communication at a distance and the diminishing possibility of immersion in anthropological fieldwork. Lise?
Hi, everyone. This has been such a joy. I'm the one presenting, but this is actually a joint paper by me and my husband, Ira Bashkow, who is down there clicking through the slides. We are anthropologists who've carried out long-term fieldwork in the Pacific, in Papua New Guinea, or I'll say PNG to be brief, since the 1990s. We began with extended periods of immersion in PNG villages, first separately and then together. We met when Ira was returning from his dissertation fieldwork and I was preparing to start mine. I spent 15 months with Arapesh people on the north coast of New Guinea, becoming fluent in Tok Pisin, PNG's lingua franca, which has largely supplanted the local vernacular. Ira lived for over 2 years with Orokaiva villagers in the southeast, learning and working in their native language. We participated in daily life. We made and transcribed audio recordings. There we go. A younger, hotter, sweatier me. And we kept extensive field notes. Since then, we've returned several times for shorter visits and maintained close relations with our PNG interlocutors, many of whom have become dear friends and adoptive kin. Our dedication to ethical research has not led us to follow the model of community collaboration that emphasizes negotiating research goals with community groups in order to create products for community benefit, at least not directly. Instead, we take our lead from local models of ethics and have cultivated relationships grounded in kinship, material reciprocity, and deep personal feeling. While our work is situated in communities, our strongest commitments are to particular individuals and families with whom our lives have been bound up now for over 3 decades. This sustained engagement has let us make contributions to ethnography, anthropological theory, linguistics, history of anthropology, field methods, and more. Our knowledge has emerged from open-ended participation in our interlocutors' lives, yielding insights that would otherwise be not attainable or not even imaginable. In our early field work, communication was always face-to-face, and in New Guinea, it often remains so today. Reaching another village meant a long hike. Calling someone in the capital required an arduous walk to the road and then a truck ride to town and a wait in the lines at the post office payphones. Letters to the U.S. took weeks. But this difficulty of communication forced us to let go of our home concerns for months at a stretch as we came to rely on our hosts, not just for research, but also socializing, companionship, emotional support, entertainment. This heightened immersion deepened our relationships along with our cultural understanding. About 15 years ago, cell towers reached our field sites. Mobile phones let us text and call. Rudimentary social media followed, along with occasional internet service and email for a privileged few with access to schools and institutions. Though PNG remains among the least connected countries in the world, these technologies have transformed our research. For example, I'm currently developing an online phone-accessible document that integrates a historical and cultural text by a village leader who is also an influential public intellectual in Papua New Guinea, integrating audio commentary from elders and my own previously archived audiovisual Arapesh materials. In 2023, I returned with an ethnobotanist colleague, Ryan Hewish, to document hundreds of plant varieties using a phone app that annotates photographs with geospatial data, identifying the plants named by vernacular terms that I had collected years earlier but couldn't fully interpret. I was just sitting with elders in the village. Calling and texting has also enabled new forms of collaboration. In 2015, my village father, Jacob Sonnen, joined me in the US as a native speaker consultant for my university course in linguistic field methods. With help from relatives living in the capital, I arranged his visa and plane tickets remotely. Our research conversations now continue by messenger calls and by our remittances that help sustain his household and fund cell phone credits. In 2023, I arranged to bring Arapesh anthropologist Andrew Motu from PNG to consult on a museum exhibition I was preparing. Ira likewise uses calls and messaging to bridge between his home and field worlds. During the pandemic, he arranged for his Archaeological research consultant and adoptive brother to buy a phone so he could video message his students in a large introductory lecture class, emphasizing that Archaeological people live fully in our shared presence. More recently, he's held weekly calls to plan a large-scale traditional feast in the village, memorializing another adoptive brother who has long since passed away. In the broad conception developed by historians of science Ricky Koklik and Robert Kohler, the field contrasts with the lab in being a research setting that is uncontrolled. But for anthropologists, the field is experienced not so much in opposition to the lab, but to home, the place where everything makes sense and one knows how things are supposed to go. For anthropologists to participate effectively in the field, they have to acquire local skills, sensitivities, and languages, and come to know specific people and places. They need to develop an ethnographic sensibility. They observe, interact with, and take notes on what people do as well as what they say, allowing research questions to emerge organically from local concerns rather than being imposed from the outside. The researchers' direct immersive experience of interacting with others in this way is what gives anthropology's signature method, participant observation, its knowledge-producing power. Unlike interviewing, participant observation allows others to determine the frame and the topics. It places the anthropologist in an uncomfortable one-down position as an apprentice or novice in an unfamiliar environment, unlike the one-up role assumed by an expert. Over the years, anthropological fieldwork has evolved in response to ethical critiques and has expanded to new kinds of settings. Yet immersion, being personally drawn into a social field by participation as opposed to distanced observation and interviewing, remains central to how anthropologists understand fieldwork. But immersion is being complicated now by these kinds of communication changes. We get calls from PNG suddenly plunging us into that world as we go about our daily lives and sometimes nights in the US. The shifts affect not only us, but also our children. Because friendships are inherited in their culture, our PNG families expect our children to carry on our relations across generations. And now that possibility is fully realistic. Conversely, when we travel to PNG, it's harder now to leave home behind. Urgent news from family or work reaches us instantly, distracting from the slow, situated process of learning who people are, what they're saying and doing, and what they mean by it. Today, it's the exception rather than the rule to be without internet access. Almost everywhere our students do fieldwork, they remain digitally connected to us, their families and friends, and to social media. They submit IRB renewals online. They attend Zoom meetings and regularly talk, text, and video chat with friends back home. They even participate in fieldwork support groups, like the Society for Linguistic Anthropology's monthly online forum for graduate students that they can attend while they're in the field. These resources are valuable. Students may choose sites close to home on principle, rejecting the idea of representing others. Some study communities that are themselves online. But regardless of why, one effect is to forestall disengagement from home. Anthropology isn't alone in facing these shifts. Study abroad programs, too, are shortening as students seek cross-cultural experiences that interrupt their home lives and trajectories as little as possible. Christian missions are having difficulty recruiting first worlders for the kind of long-term faraway placements that once were the norm. It seems that anthropologists, students, and missionaries alike are increasingly reluctant to step away and suspend participation in their home lives, even temporarily. As a discipline, anthropology continues to value immersion, participating in people's activities on their terms. But this is now shifting in practice, not because of any principled critique or disciplinary debate, but due to cultural changes in anthropologists themselves. These changes, which are fed by technology, lessen anthropologists' willingness to disengage for long periods from their home concerns, relationships, and frames of reference. The risk is that anthropologists will tacitly avoid the most difficult experiences of immersive learning. When in the field, anthropologists experience awkwardness, frustration, confusion, discomfort, and disorientation because the way things are unfolding around them challenges their own deeply ingrained cultural assumptions and expectations. Working through these feelings requires learning new skills, new ways of thinking and speaking, and also creates new social interdependencies. When researchers remain tethered to home, they may short-circuit this challenging process, falling back on familiar habits. I'm thinking especially of interviewing. As historians of science, Kuklik and Kohler observe, in the field, scientists' activities shade sometimes almost imperceptibly into whatever else people are doing there. For anthropologists, participating in those other activities is not incidental, but critical. But now that home travels with us, remaining digitally present wherever we go, and immersive participation is increasingly eclipsed by our own persistent attachments, the meaning of the field is changing for anthropology and perhaps for other disciplines. Thank you.
Okay, our final speaker in this session is Rosa Varillas, who will speak on drones and the future of archaeological research fieldwork, data collection, and community engagement.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rosa Maria. Thank you for having me here. I am Rosa Maria Varillas, a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Chicago, and a researcher at the Field Museum of Natural History. This talk is a collaboration with Corey Bowen, also from UIC and the Field Museum. We'll be discussing how drones are changing fieldwork, data collection, and community engagement in archaeology. So, archaeological fieldwork has long been romanticized as the gritty, physical, strenuous catalyst for the creation of real archaeologists. I believe propagated as much by the field school rite of passage and professional self-narratives as by media representations of the discipline. Even as we begin to recognize the sexism and classism behind the idea that fieldwork must be tough, new data collection technologies, which could ease some of these problems, still face some hesitation in favor of old pen and pencil methods. Recent events have pushed archaeology further into the digital era. During COVID-19, researchers adopted new online and virtual methods to stay safe, but the pandemic still increased unemployment and workloads, especially for women and early career scholars. Soon after, federal funding cuts, including the National Science Foundation, threatened archaeology's future by limiting support for graduate research. With anthropology PhDs now average nearly 10 years, extended fieldwork is increasingly unrealistic. In response, both authors of this paper turned to drones to navigate post-COVID challenges, reducing cost risks, and time in the fields. Our projects in Peru and Bolivia, respectively, supported by the APS Lewis and Clark Fund, show how drones can reshape what fieldwork looks like and who can participate in it. So our first case study is my own work in Chile, Peru, which focuses on the site of Puerto Inca and Inca expansion in the southern shore of Peru. The Chala Valley on Peru's southern coast is a rugged landscape of quebradas, cliffs, and coasts with both Inca and pre-Inca sites. At its coastal end lies Puerto Inca, a settlement with a plaza, altars, storage facilities, and domestic sectors, located where the Inca coastal road met the Trans-Andean route to Cusco, a strategic point linking coast and highlands. This project combined pedestrian and drone survey targeted excavations, and orthophoto-based mapping alongside ceramic and clay analysis via ICPMS, and botanical and faunal studies to examine Inca-local interactions, research management, and how imperial and regional dynamics shape settlement and landscape use along the southern coast. So our first season was back in 2021. It took place during Peru's COVID-19 lockdowns, where mobility and crew assembly were severely restricted, if not absolutely impossible. There were just no vaccines at that point in Peru. To address these constraints, a drone-based survey of Puerto Inca was undertaken instead of the originally planned traditional pedestrian survey. This approach also enabled the expansion to other areas identified through satellite images, meaning Google Earth. One was the site of La Caleta, first noted in the 1970s, but never excavated or systematically studied. Additional locations, including small cliff-sized sites on Puerto Inca, were also targeted. Again, those were sites that have never, ever been recorded. The DJI Mini 2 drone was chosen as this model is light enough, being less than 240 grams, to avoid any FAA licensing, which allowed pre-flight training in Chicago. Its possibility also made it ideal for minimal staff fieldwork, as I could carry a drone by myself. Aside from better site identification and registration, drone mapping produced orthophotos and 3D models, which were used to plan future excavations and support Ministry of Culture permits. Permits now require precise geographical coordinates, so photogrammetric mapping provides an effective substitute in the absence of a total station. It also allowed me to map all sectors of Puerto Inca together for the first time. For the second season, we conducted a full drone survey of the Quebrada and adjacent coastal sites within a 10-kilometer radius of Puerto Inca. This distance was chosen as a distance a person can typically walk in and back in a day. Flights followed a polygon-based method developed by Luis Jaime Castillo from Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, which implementation support in the field by his student, Héctor Barrera. We used a Phantom 4 drone with pre-programmed path at 30 meters above the highest point and 75% photo overlap. We use Google Earth too that help us identify priority areas, while smaller or newly at the field discovered sites were documented manually with either the Phantom 4 or the DJI Mini 2. Battery life was a major constraint, with large sites requiring up to 4 batteries and only 7 available, so careful planning and charging logistics were essential. Despite these limitations, the survey successfully documented over 20 sites, many previously unknown or lacking any detailed records, and revealed a wide range of architectural patterns, from small cliff-like sites to much larger settlements over 1,000 square meters. The resulting orthophotos, 3D reconstructions, and digital topography now form the foundation for understanding settlement organization and movement for the region. The drone survey reviewed more complex architectural patterns than previously recognized. At La Caleta, multiple sectors and a perimeter wall were documented for the first time, while Puerto Inca shows a previously unrecorded upper sector. We also recorded 2 additional canchas with rectangular colcas in the Chala Quebrada, reflecting standardized Inca forms for storage and settlement. Drone mapping reduced the required time for the additional total station surveys, allowing us to cover more sites and generate higher resolution datasets. This, at the same time, freed more time for additional analysis, which included terraces and soil and colca residues, which confirmed the presence of maize and other highland crops, and mapped shell median deposits highlighting integrated coastal and highland productions and storage systems. Also, ongoing ICPMS work and radiocarbon dating will further refine local production, exchange, and occupational patterns. Finally, sharing drone images with local communities help visualize site boundaries, document conditions, and support heritage awareness, particularly in areas currently threatened by illegal mining and agricultural expansion. This strengthens local engagements and contribute to ongoing site protection efforts. Then our second case study is situated in Tiahuanaco, Bolivia, with a focus on thermography in the study of hydraulics. During the 16th century Common Era, Tiahuanaco grew in the capital of a vast political and religious center that spanned to the south-central Andes. Scholars have long studied a field system that sustained this highland city of over 20,000 people and potential effects of the climate shift on its social political organization. Since 2022, the Proyecto Archaeological del Valle de Tiahuanaco, led by my co-author Corey Bowen, has sought to move beyond questions of subsistence and irrigations toward a broader understanding of water economics, political, and religious roles. The project includes extensive survey to locate canals and modify springs across the Tiahuanaco Valley, building on earlier studies on the Tiahuanaco River, paleography, and the city hydraulics architecture. Drone-based photography was used in 2 ways. visual imagery for targeted study of springs, and thermal imagery to detect larger water management systems. Because thermography relies on difference in soil moisture, it was expected to be especially effective in the highland plains, where ancient infrastructure built for wet summers might stand out clearly during the dry winters. Given the political and economical significance of water, some local authorities initially worried that archaeological work could disturb community springs. So drone photography helped ease these concerns by allowing remote visual inspection without physical contacts. In fact, many communities later requested additional images to help document and protect their water sources from external encroachment. Live video transmissions also let collaborators confirm in real time that no private property was being filmed and suggest new survey areas based on their local knowledge. The aerial survey of this project took place in 2 phases during 2022 and 2023 field seasons. Experimental thermography flights were carried out within the Tiwanaku Archaeological Site to develop best practices for data collection and to compare thermal imagery with existing excavations and remote sensing data. These images were captured using FLIR View Pro thermal camera mounted on a DJI Phantom 3 advanced drone. In 2025, site survey expanded to the broader valley using both visual and thermal imagery. 16 springs within the municipality of Tiwanaku were selected based on their seasonal permanence and accessibility. Each was first documented through visual drone photography with a DJI Mini 2 CE and a ground-based pedestrian survey. Sites with sustainable flat terrains were also surveyed using aerial thermography, following the protocol established in earlier field seasons. Aerial thermography proved highly effective for identifying hydraulic architecture compared to other remote sensing methods. Known canals show much stronger contrast than in visual imagery or LiDAR models, and were easily distinguished from roads, modern irrigation, and other lineal features. Thermal images also revealed buried walls and historic adobe structures that were invisible from the ground. Drone photography greatly expanded the project's reach. Many springs were located at the base of steep canyons with flooded areas that were unsafe to access on foot. Because fieldwork was limited to time when communities authorities could accompany us, efficiency was essential. Drone mapping reduced the number of required field days by nearly a third compared to the original schedule. So drone-assisted surveys in both the Chala Quebrada and Tiwanaku significantly increased efficiency, while still allowing thorough ground truthing. They produce multidimensional datasets documenting topography, architecture, and landscape use, enhancing rather than replacing traditional methods. Both surveys were completed in under 2 weeks, much faster than traditional methods, producing high-resolution maps and 3D models that allow for immediate field decisions. The time saved enabled expanded research, including ceramic and clay sampling and soil sampling to study agricultural use. Beyond efficiency, UAV survey supports collaborative and ethical research. Aerial mapping can raise concerns about consent, ownership, and accessibility, but in our project, communities were actively involved, supervising data collection and using imagery to document and protect vulnerable sites. Drone use thus enhanced both research scope and community engagement, making surveys faster, more comprehensive, and more inclusive. In an era of funding cuts and pandemic-related delays, these case studies show that graduate-level archaeological research can still be conducted effectively, even with limited time, personnel, and resources. And with that, we deeply thank the communities who guided and supervised our work, as well as all of our other academic collaborators and our respective projects, and of course, Lewis and Clark Fund and all of the other support institutions.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Well, let's open up the floor to any questions if anyone might have for our panelists here.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I'm sure this question is relevant for everyone, but it's particularly for Lise. And so thinking about the changes in culture and how they relate to technology, I feel like I got a hint of how you felt about it, but I feel like it was more descriptive than it was a judgment call on it. And I know all the panelists were talking about the pros and cons, so to speak, but I'm curious how you feel about the evolution of that culture that you're seeing in anthropology and other fields, and how it relates to your own experiences as a field scientist, as a field researcher?
I'll just answer as an anthropologist. You watch it and you participate in it and you see how it changes things. I don't think it's my job to judge. I mean, like I said, there's so much benefit, and and I also see the challenges. So, yeah, I'd love to be a graduate student and go to the graduate student field work support group while in the field. That's just so cool.
I mean, for me, the idea is that, like, a lot of this technological stuff is going to continue to advance and I think have a very mixed effect. I mean, I think there's certainly, I talked about reach, I talked about engagement, and making sure that young people think of it as a language that can exist in new domains. But I also think there's a lot of sort of fool's gold out there to be had in new technologies. I know that there are people who are trying to sort of shoehorn AI into language revitalization stuff, and while non-LLM AI might have some very good uses, I think that we need to be really, really careful about using LLMs, especially with underdocumented languages, in terms of it's an issue of both data sovereignty and of just not having enough data already there to have an LLM even work. But I think people are going to just gravitate to it because that's where the hype is, and that's what I'm worried about.
I was thinking as what you were talking about your grad students, and also I've been thinking this morning, because I came to the presentation, it was very much like grad students are in trouble right now, just trying to get enough funding to go and do a traditional, 2 months or 6 months or at least a month of fieldwork, and we both were like, well, this is what we can do. But I do think some things are being lost in time, as you said, like in time span. I was thinking about my earlier projects in undergrad. You spend 6 months shoveling dirt with somebody, and by the end of excavation, you know each other's like life history completely. And it could be like somebody, I was a 20-year-old girl, young woman from Lima, and I was like, developing friendship with like older men from the field that we normally would have nothing in common, but just the process of spending 6 weeks nonstop, just working 8 hours a day, hand by hand, figuring out like how to get the wheelbarrow around. And now it's like, well, I spent like, a couple of evenings with a woman in the community. She helped me around. I showed him some pictures. I really think I could have done more, and I really want to do more in the future. But at the same time, I don't have the funds to stay there for so long. And then talking about you and not being able to disconnect with my family. Again, my first projects, I would go to Chavin de Huántar, and nobody could reach me for a month. And they had like no idea where I was. Now, I'm climbing a mountain, and I have my sister texting me about my grandma. Like, it's like, and I have to interact with that, because if not, I'm a bad family member.
So, Paul Barber, UCLA. I really relate with what you're saying about being isolated in the field and the value of that, and sort of thinking about people like me that run field programs. I think back on my own experiences, as a graduate student, and that isolation and the need to really think through problems on your own, or the degree to which you made connections with people, because at the end of the day, there wasn't Netflix to watch. You couldn't FaceTime with your family back home. It's like you actually had to talk to people. And I wonder, like, as we're thinking about the future of field work and training people to be field scientists, is there a value to actually doing field training where you say, what, like for these 2 weeks, you leave the technology at home? And despite, we use lots of technology and it's transformed things, but there are things that are being lost as well. And should we be doing that when we train students now?
I don't want to answer that question because I don't know the answer. I mean, I feel like those are the questions we need to be asking ourselves, that, just acknowledging that fieldwork is changing in so many positive ways, that there might be other sides to it. And certainly where, it's like the key thing is relationship building. Like, we keep talking about relationship building. We've been doing it for 2 days, right? So what does it take to build those relationships, and when are they built? Yeah. Ira? No, you tell. He's also a co-author, he can tell. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Ira Bashkow, I'm the co-author at University of Virginia. So this is actually something Lise told me the other day, and she said, so we're not anti-technology in any way, and like there isn't some sense in which, I wish I didn't have a phone right now and wasn't able to let our children watch her presentation. Like, these are wonderful things, okay, and these applications are phenomenal, but also, as a parent, as a teacher, we find that people are distracted all the time. And one of the things that Lise told me last night, okay, so I'm talking, but it's her idea, was a friend who's a teacher in local schools in Virginia, and she says it's like really hard to have little kids work through difficult times. Like, when they feel bad, they quickly go to the phone, which has a sort of distracting effect. It's the Netflix series. And so, there is some broad thing that fieldwork is hard, and everybody here has described challenges of one kind or another. And working with communities is hard. And then a lot of things in our personal lives are hard. And so there is a downside with the phone, and it's training us in some sense. And so, I don't know, we felt like it was a great opportunity to sort of, bring to the surface that issue, because it's happening sort of quickly and yet sort of slowly all around us all the time in every part of our lives.
Sorry, if I could just say one more thing. So, by virtue of having that relationship in the field that I had to cultivate with the Christian missionaries, okay, I'm Jewish, this was not like, originally my people. I spent a lot of time with the missionary linguist who worked in the area where I do research, and as a result of connecting with him and then getting into, continuing to like archive his field notes actually, I spent a lot of time in the missionary center in Dallas, and that is where I learned that the missionaries are having a much harder time recruiting for the long-term, long-term stations that they used to go for. The guy that I work with had been his whole adult life in New Guinea. And that is very hard to find these days for them as well. So I feel like this is a larger cultural phenomenon in the world that field workers come from, right? So it's sort of worth pulling to the surface.
So hi, Josh Drew, SUNY ESF, and Paul's former student. And you're absolutely right, Paul. You would send me out, and I would come back 2 months later, and you'd be like, "How was it?" Right? And that was that. Which, had benefits and negatives to it. And I do agree, like when I was out in community for 2 months, really learning about how indigenous communities think about conservation, there was that slow work that you talk about of having to have those conversations over bowls of kava and thinking about like, what does it mean to protect species? But I want to offer maybe another, a counterpoint. I have had a number of indigenous students, Native American students with me, and the societal and familial and cultural obligations that they have, either being in ceremony or being able to show up, when your grandma is sick, right? There are those obligations that I wonder if they didn't have that ability to keep one foot within their community, if that would preclude them from doing work, or if that would preclude them from doing the types of work that they are doing. So I will sit strongly on the line, because I don't have an idea of one way or the other. But as we're thinking about ways to diversify the field and to be more inclusive, maybe thinking about people who have parental duties or who have cultural obligations, there might be a benefit to being able to check in and fulfill those as well.
I take your point about technology. I was driving across the Tibetan Plateau with a friend, after field work, and I didn't have a phone, but he did, and he got a phone call from his wife in Russia. And it was like, oh, this is really disturbing. Why is this happening? Because it was so tranquil and peaceful to be out there, and to be away from everything really does focus your attention on the work. But I do have to say that I'm grateful, on the other hand, for technology, because I've had 3 instances now in my own field research where I needed a helicopter rescue of someone who got hurt. And if this person, one of them at least, had not been rescued, he probably would have died in the field. And so having the technology, even though it's dangerous, also was incredibly important for saving this man's life. So it goes both ways, as sitting on the line, as you suggested.
Being of a certain age myself, I can't help thinking that this has a certain age-related component about it. Because, when we give our grants to our Lewis and Clark applicants, they're ready to take off and be in the field as long as they need to, or as long as they can afford to. Partly because they have fewer familial constraints, frankly. So, as we all get along in our lives, we tend to make more and more connections in a close family, and that interferes with going out in a long-term personal relationship type research. It's not as bad for natural scientists who go out and do a set of observations and experiments and then go home. They're not trying necessarily to develop community relationships, although often they do, and that's fabulous. But I'm just wondering how much the level, the point at which your career is influences your question.
Okay, I'm asking a question again on behalf of Christopher Roy, although I have a similar question about sort of the anthropology specifically having always had a tradition of doing participant observation at home, and sort of how that kind of maps onto the case study that you presented about your experiences in Papua New Guinea. Is there kind of more nuance to be brought out here about anthropology in particular? There's plenty of anthropologists who have done field work in corporations, next door to where they live. So maybe just to kind of add that angle to this, is there something more here than just the kind of distance and the connectivity that you're talking about in this case?
Yeah, of course. So Adriana, of course. We thought a lot about how to stage that. And home and field don't have to be 9,000 miles apart. But people who do field work in corporations do find that they're in the field and not like at home. Now, we know we have graduate students and people are energetically, if you put a boundary up for anthropologists, they're going to find a way to go through it and test it. And so we have people now we have a particular grad student doing field work in her own family, among the women in her own family. So, that's as much bridging as home, bridging field and home as you could possibly be. And that exists also. And still what she and others report is that when you turn your home then into the field, something else, something changes. So it doesn't, crossing a boundary doesn't make it go away. It just is another form of approaching it. But I realize that we did field work of a fairly traditional kind, very far away. And it was an immense privilege for us to be, and now over many years, to really be part of people's lives and to, do things that we couldn't do now at our age, at the time, but now have the foundation of these relationships that have been built in so much trust and over so many years. And so we look around, and it's true, we look from that perspective and see okay, people do have reasons that they want to bridge those boundaries. There are critiques of the ethics of going off to faraway places, and yet this is another change that's really transforming it, and that we talk about technology a lot, but we haven't talked so much about how technology is transforming that aspect of the field experience, and we just wanted to bring that up, I guess. Yeah.
I want to circle back to technology itself, because we've talked a lot about our relationship as researchers to technology. But I was wondering whether any of you had had experience of actually using technology as a research tool. And the reason I'm asking this is I've seen numbers of applications for field work where they were asking for instant cameras to give to their research participants to allow them to carry out aspects of field work themselves, or the same thing with voice recorders. And I'm, about 8 years out of date now, and I imagine there's other aspects in the same mold of this, where not only anthropological field workers, but from botany, or if you're working on bugs or something like this, whether technology has helped to facilitate the actual gathering of the data and connecting your research with the research participants with your community.
In my project, my colleague Meg Harvey actually did her dissertation on gathering linguistic data from people in the community who were starting to speak Tunica again. And this was during COVID, and she had to totally change her research project because she was planning on going to Mexico and working with another tribal community, but she couldn't. And what she did was she sent gaming headphones or microphones, headsets to all of the people that would be participating in these Zoom calls where they worked on their Tunica language work, and was able to gather some really great data only because of these types of recording equipment. And her dissertation was about sort of a methodology for doing this sort of data gathering of linguistic data at distance.
I would like to add, like my co-author Corey, he didn't handle the drone to the community members because he only had one drone, but he had them next to him looking live at live video of what he was recording, so they could be like, we do not want you flying over there, that's private property. Actually, there's a spring over there, you should fly in that direction. So they were like giving him live feedback of what he should be recording, and actually, improving his survey because of that.
Hi, I'm Katie Lee. I'm an anthropologist at Tulane. And so some of the things that have come up are like the time commitment of doing field work, and also the role that technology can have in efficiency. And I see that these are really in tension, but especially because, at least in my field, there's a pressure to graduate more quickly than prior generations, right? Like the average time to PhD in anthropology used to be a decade, 12 years, 15 years. And now you talk about programs because of doing 2 years of field work, right? And then you come back and you do all of the writing up. How do we sort of think about what the future of field work looks like when we're giving students 3 years or 5 years of funding and there isn't another mechanism, right? So I see this tension between efficiency and the need to be deeply in community, and I'm not sure what to do or how to mentor my students, because I did, 3 summers of field work, not an extended version for various reasons.
I don't know the answer, but I'm gonna say it's something I struggled to. In my case, on my co-authors, we also had to do with COVID. So we had a whole summer we were just stuck in the US, that we should have gone and do fieldwork. And then you're coming out of COVID, and there's 2 free generations are all applying for the same grants because we all got stuck at the same time. So it suddenly became even more competitive to get fieldwork done. So yeah, I sympathize with you. I don't have an answer. I just want to say like it is a problem many of us are thinking on.
As someone who is, you know, rapidly approaching their expiration date, I can look back and see that, you know, finishing your dissertation is just the beginning, right? So like there are a lot of points that seem like the end point, but they're actually just the beginning point. And I mean, the tension that you're talking about is absolutely real. So, you know, yeah, you've got to finish fast, but it's not like you will never be able to do field work again after you finish your dissertation. Like, right, in Europe, there are much speedier PhDs than there are here. And so I think we just have to kind of encourage students to take the long view and remind them that there's more opportunities still to come, thinking of it as not just like a punctuated event that you go on with the rest of your life, but the beginning of a series of encounters, projects, whatever, maybe in the same place, maybe in different places, but yeah, I think part of it is backing up your perspective also, because, well, we have to work within the constraints we have. And, you know, about that line of technology, is it good or bad? Who cares what we think, because it's here, right? So we just have to understand.
No, I agree. I was going to say, like, it's part of a larger discussion of what it is to have a PhD in anthropology. Like, what is good enough? And that, I think, is an ongoing discussion that you have with your advisor. But sometimes advisors don't know that, like, it takes a lot of bravery to come to your advisor and be like, I think I have enough data and I want to graduate. Or to sit your student down and be like, hey, you've been here for 12 years. Let's figure out how do we get you out. And I think those conversations have to happen. They might have to happen earlier on than when they are happening. But it takes a lot of bravery on both ends to just sit down and have a conversation.
I wanted to second some of that, because the criteria for a PhD at Oxford University is what can reasonably be completed within 3 years. And what they emphasize is it's not your life's work. It's the first step on your research career. So I think that in the US here, we need to possibly rethink what a PhD is.
Cool. With that in mind, let's save other questions till the end of the next session, when we'll have a broader discussion, and take a break now. It's 2:45. We'll reconvene at 3:15. Thanks to our panelists.